Hello and welcome back to Spinalcast. Joining us today is Dr. Brooke Ellison. Not only is she an author, a speaker, a Harvard graduate, but she's also an associate professor at Stony Brook University, and she focuses primarily on applied medical ethics, health policy, and disability. Brooke, thank you for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure, David. Thank you for having me. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. I'm really glad we were able to find a time to get you on the podcast. I think you have some incredible knowledge and stories around not only yourself, but what you've been able to accomplish throughout your life and career. And so, first and foremost, thank you for being such a great advocate for the spinal cord injury community. It's people like you that kind of keep this train moving.
Thank you. I view it as a privilege, really, more than anything else. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. So why don't we go ahead and start for the people at home, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of giving us some details and a quick story around how you got injured and when that happened and kind of how that happened.
Sure, of course. So I like to talk about a lot of things, but nothing more than talking about myself. So we are well set to go. So I am talking to you from Long Island, which Stony Brook, Long Island, to be specific, and that's about halfway out on the North Shore. If you were to travel from New York City to the easternmost point of Long Island, it's about halfway out on the North Shore. And this is largely where I grew up. It wasn't where I was born, but definitely where I grew up.
Okay.
I was born in Nassau County, which is closer to New York City than where I am now. And my parents moved my older sister and my younger brother out to Suffolk County when I was just 2 years old. Nassau County, just kind of being on the outskirts of New York City, is, as I'm sure you can expect, kind of congested,
I could imagine.
Yeah. I mean, beautiful, no, definitely beautiful, but at the same time, a little bit more congested than my parents were looking to have when raising their kids. So They moved us out east a little bit, and my childhood was very emblematic of many other kind of suburban childhoods. I was involved in many physical activities. I was involved in dancing. I started dancing when I was just 2 years old.
Wow.
Little league baseball and soccer, and I sang in my church choir, and I studied karate. So all of these things really were the focal point of my life. Go to school during the day, and then any day was kind of flavored by or characterized by whatever physical activity I was a part of.
Yeah, you were a busy kid.
I was a busy kid, exactly, and I loved it that way. That was how I understood. Like, that's what made sense, right? It's just like that was life. But when I was 11 years old, so this is turning back the clock to some 32 years to 1990, it was the first day of my junior high school year, so my seventh grade year, and some friends and I decided to walk home from school. This was a new school, and we were feeling independent, feeling adult.
First day of school, got to be a little bit rebellious, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what we did. So in order to walk home, we had to cross a pretty major highway here on Long Island. And in the process, I was hit by a car. It was a car traveling southbound on Nichols Road, which is a major highway here. And I was traveling about 55 miles an hour. And and it was just one of those situations where I didn't see the car. The driver didn't see me, and I was the only one in the group of friends that I was with that was physically injured. We were all kind of affected in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, but I was the only one who was physically affected. So the damage that was done to my body was really quite extensive, really almost immeasurable. So my head hit the windshield of the car and cracked my skull open. And then I was thrown about 100 feet in front of the car and landed on the pavement. And in so doing, I bit down. I lost about a third of my tongue in that process. And then, I had some damage done to all of my limbs, either broken or ligament damage. And when the EMS, or the emergency response, arrived at the scene of my accident, I was in cardiac and respiratory arrest. So resuscitative measures were put into place immediately. And it was really only because my accident happened very close to the local trauma center, Stony Brook Hospital, that there was any chance of my survival. So I was taken there immediately. And my parents were essentially told to expect the worst, that you likely would not survive the enormity of the injuries that were just so extensive.
I would imagine that would be the case. I mean,
yeah,
it sounds awful.
It was awful. That is for sure. And the expectation that, given the types of injuries that I sustained, that if I were to survive, that I would likely be very cognitively impaired. That was kind of the prognosis that was put on the circumstances at the time, and really there was no reason to believe anything other than that.
Right.
So for 36 hours, we were in this weird, existential limbo, and nobody really knew what was going to happen, what turn my life was going to take, whether I was going to survive or anything. Fortunately, after 36 hours, so about a day and a half, I awoke from the coma that I was in, and I was able to make eye contact with my mother and kind of indicate that I had some awareness, that I was recognizing her face, and that I knew that something very dramatic had happened to me. I didn't exactly know what. I was kind of in this weird haze,
limbo.
Not really exactly limbo, not really knowing where I was or what was going on.
So the coma that you were in, was that sustaining the injury kind of put you in a coma, or did they put you in a medical coma just to make sure they
it
could
was more the latter.
Okay.
The EEG readings at the time, right, were just we're flat. There was a lot of, I guess, movement towards making sure that my body could rest as much as possible. That until things became a little bit clearer in terms of what direction my prognosis was going to take, that they wanted to give my body as much of a chance to heal on its own and kind of come to terms with whatever physicality it was experiencing at the time on its own. So, a lot of the fears that were surrounding, obviously, my survival and then my cognitive ability thereafter abated, right? I was able to survive, even though every day after my accident was a bit tenuous, not really knowing what was going to happen from one day to the next.
Totally.
But I spent 6 weeks in pediatric intensive care, just kind of getting stabilized, getting trached. So they put it in a tracheostomy tube, so I could breathe more easily on the ventilator. They did surgeries to stabilize my physical situation. And then I was moved to rehabilitation. So I was in rehabilitation for 7.5 months. There was no rehabilitation center. It was a really long haul. There was no rehabilitation center anywhere nearby, anywhere on Long Island or even really in New York State, that was willing to take me as a patient, given how young I was, not old I was, how young I was. And given the kind of extent of my injuries and the fact that I was on a ventilator. So I had to go to a rehabilitation center in New Jersey, kind of like the daughter center to Kessler's, called Children's Specialized Hospital. And this was the first time I was away from home really for any length of time. I never went to camp or anything like that. Very much a homebody. So there I was, and my mother, actually her first day of work as a teacher, a special ed teacher in a local school district, was the very same day as my accident. It was also her last day as a teacher. So she left her position. This was a really obviously familially transformative day in my
it's a life-altering event, without a doubt.
Holy mackerel, so much so. And it's kind of like the date that we tend to understand in two different sides of our lives, right? When things were as I think many families typically live, and then when things went in a different direction.
Right.
So I was in the hospital for 9 months. 9 months, and it was in rehabilitation that I learned to just live again, learn to just drive a wheelchair, learn to talk on a ventilator, which is not something that is, especially easy to do. It sounds like something that would be easy to do, but it requires a lot of practice and, learning to gauge your speech patterns in concert with, with the breath that comes in and out. I learned just kind of very elemental technology to interface with the computer, like really, really basic things, so I could try to get on with my life. And, like, I knew that I was entering a world that was going to be very different from how I had engaged with it in the past. I needed to learn to be as vocal as I possibly could be and be an advocate for myself and take on the things that would allow me to continue to make a difference in the world, whether that was through my education or being, engaged in other ways. And my primary concern was returning to school. Like, that was something that was of central importance to me right after my accident.
Okay.
And, my parents made a commitment to me that they would help me make that happen. We didn't really understand what kinds of barriers they would be.
Right.
Like,
what does that mean? Right?
Yeah,
to actually accomplish that.
Right. It's one thing to say, this is what we're going to be able to do. But way back in 1990, this was like, we were in a very different time when it comes to how people with disabilities were understood or appreciated, right? It was like thought of as okay to let, a child with a disability just kind of not participate or not be included in the classroom, or an adult with a disability not be included in the workforce, right? Like, that was totally okay. And I remember, like, I was a product of that thinking just as much as anybody else, right? Even though I was only 11 or 12 years old at the time, like, I was very much a product of that social thinking that was okay. That was an okay thing to do. And I remember having to fight that, thinking, wait a second, no, I have something really valuable that I want to offer. I have a place in this world, and we need to make sure that, other people understand that.
Well,
so we fought.
Yeah, no, I think you kind of raise an interesting point. Is there's a shift in the mindset that you had following the injury of either I'm going to fall into the kind of social norms that are set upon me and my injury and my situation, or I'm going to kind of deviate from that, preset form and get what I want and do what I want and make it happen. And so that kind of mentality, that approach, how did you originally formulate that kind of approach to life's challenges that were thrown at you? I think for a lot of people, I mean, if someone's watching this and they're previously or recently injured, I think everyone struggles with that gap and when they make that switch. And so what kind of helped you make that approach change, and what has really kind of been your key elements to that approach?
Right. I appreciate that question. I think that's a really important one. So, I mean, I think that, in all honesty, there's, there are several factors at play, right? So I was and still am a very stubborn person. So I know like what I want and how I want to go about getting to that point. So that that was clearly a part of it. I have a really strong support network around me, a family that cared and continues to care very deeply about my success and making sure that my life can be as rich as it possibly can be. But at the same time, right, there's this social question that needs to be addressed as well. Like, at that time, there were just certainly many people in the disability community who were making forays into changing that societal position, right? People like Justin Dart, who were like at the head of the movement towards, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and kind of helping to change that perception. But there were not really that many people, right? There were not that many people. And still to this day, there are not that many people with disabilities who are in positions of leadership or kind of being the kinds of role models that I think the world needs to help shift our thinking from, wait a second, people with disabilities should not be included, to we need to change that completely. We need to do a complete 180 when it comes to how people are appreciated. And that is the work that I've really committed myself to.
Yeah, I do think it's a systemic issue, especially for people who maybe just haven't even been exposed to someone who has a disability. I think there is a kind of a unwritten, I shouldn't say rule, but almost an unwritten kind of societal belief that, I don't want to exclude anybody, but I also don't want to feel like I'm being so inclusive that it's unsincere, And so
Right,
it's like,
right,
how do I
right.
approach someone with a disability and say, like, I want to get you involved without having it seem like I'm trying to angle for something or
Is there
have it, you know,
exactly some kind
and
of tokenism or whatever? Yeah, of course.
yeah. And so I think for people with disabilities to be able to have that strength and for people to know that it's not disrespectful to think of them as equals, and it's not disrespectful to think of them, you know, the way that everyone would want to be thought of, right? It's
Exactly.
trying to create this level of equality, which has, you know, been a massive topic for society as of late, but continuing to do that and branching it further out is going to be crucial.
Right, right. I mean, man, I mean, there, as you mentioned, right, like, society is dealing with a lot of social iniquities, right? Like, I think we are seeing the effects or the consequences, I should say, of a failure to account for everybody in our policy making and our decision making and the kinds of worlds that we have created. But even to this day, people with disabilities, wheelchair users, people with spinal cord injuries, what have you, have really been absent from that conversation. So we can talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belongingness, but like it requires an additional step in many different additional factors to take into account in order to make that realistic for people with disabilities. So it's not just tokenism, right? It's not just we're going to make this accommodation so that we can, virtue signal or make it like, we're trying to, walk the talk, but actually to actually do that, that requires additional forethought and really being mindful of the lived experiences of people with disabilities and saying, okay, this is something that's valuable. This is something that we want in our workplace or in our classroom or wherever, rather than just a gesture.
Totally. And that's a constant theme, I think, in many of our episodes that we've recorded thus far, is the fact that the lived experience is like absolutely critical to people understanding it and people being open to it. And so I really like that kind of tie-in. Going through your history and your I guess what I would call accomplishments, it's a flippin' impressive list, by the way.
Thank you.
But one of the things that kind of excited me, because I'm a big TED Talk fan, is I saw that you gave a TED Talk and kind of focusing around hope and three key elements of hope. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just kind of tying back to that TED Talk and talking a little bit about that and kind of the topic that you covered.
Absolutely. Actually, the question that you just asked about, like, what was the impetus behind me making that mind shift? Like, that is kind of the heart and soul of how I understand hope. So I'll back up a little bit. So when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, I did I was focused on cognitive neuroscience. So it was kind of a fairly new program at the time. Now, much older, but a fairly new program at the time. And there were various ways you could approach cognitive neuroscience. It was a joint program between either psychology and computer science, or psychology and something else that I can't remember right now. Or psychology and biology. So mine was the mind, brain, behavior track, and there were many people in this track who are looking to go into medicine. This is kind of like the stepping stone into the medical profession. And so this was, an intersection of psychology and biology. So kind of taking a very kind of biological look at how people behave and why people do what they do. So I focused my research and my honors thesis ultimately on the intersection of hope and resilience, right? So two constructs that I think tend to think of as almost, analogous to one another, but are actually very different. And, hope ever since has been a really kind of constant in my life. And when I say hope, like, I don't just mean really kind of ethereal things that we wish for or we want in life, but hope as a verb, right, as an action statement. And I understand the components of hope as to be like starting with goal setting, right? Kind of having a vision for things you want to accomplish, even if they are seemingly small, but kind of just a manifestation of purposefulness that we can use to guide our lives. And how we get from where we are to those goals, is a cluster of factors that involve, kind of not just so understanding the challenges in our lives, because we all have them, we're all going to face them, but not letting them become completely all encompassing that we can't think about everything else. Right? So anytime any one of us undergoes a challenge in our lives, it can easily feel like, this is taking over every part of our lives, and we become completely incapacitated in every aspect of our lives, even if it's just kind of circumscribed to one component of it, right? So kind of the first aspect of hope, as far as I see it, is compartmentalizing the challenge. So it's just kind of limited to as least impactful a role as it can possibly play.
Right.
And then reorienting our focus, right? So after, because when we face challenges, that becomes the center of our attention, right? That becomes the object at which we continue to look, even if we don't need to, right? So then from there, after compartmentalizing that challenge, even though I know that's more difficult than the words might imply, reorienting our focus, right? So looking just to other aspects of our lives that we can still continue to make a difference and still, engage in and give our lives meaning. And then finding ways to develop our own sense of personal empowerment, whether that is through kind of personal conviction, personal will, or through the supports that we need around us, right? Like I have, whatever accomplishments I've had in my life, but I would be completely foolhardy and erroneous to say that, these are the products just of my own efforts, right? I've been able to find the people in my life who were willing to offer support, to be the voice of encouragement. You pick me up on days where I feel really down or frustrated. Like all of these entities in my life were central, absolutely pivotal to be able to do anything that I've done with my life. So those are what I understand hope to be. And it's like not looking away from challenge or denying that it exists, but it's actually kind of a deliberate acknowledgement of the challenges in our lives and saying, okay, wait a second, I'm still going to move forward with it anyway. It's an understanding of the challenges in our lives and not saying that we're going to dismiss them, but living alongside them.
Yeah, the best way, it's a redefinition of hope, right? It's a purposeful definition of hope versus, say, Merriam-Webster's definition of hope. The meaning of the word hope is much more complex than, an empty wish that is held internally. So you're kind of approaching hope in a much more constructive way that builds it into, these processes that allow you to actually take action on hope versus wish it into existence.
Exactly right. Exactly. And that has a physiological as well as psychological effect on who we are, right? It helps to rewire our brains so that we don't live in fear of the challenges that we experience. It moves trauma from historical memory to active memory. It's something that we can actually do something about, right? So it's not a constant fear in our lives. It's something we can take ownership over.
So changing gears a little bit, first and foremost, I like that definition a lot. I think, being able to approach problems in that way would help a lot of people in the world, whether you have disabilities or not, but being able to look at the word hope in that way, just for anybody, I think is valuable. So if we can find the link, or if you can send us the link to the TED Talk, we'll make sure we put that in the description below so people can go check it out and, share it around. Because I think it's one of those things. I've come across numerous things like that in my life in which it's like, this is brilliant enough that it should not be secluded to one group. And so I think that's a perfect example of that's.
Thank you.
It's wonderful thinking. So
I appreciate that so much. It applies to everybody, just as you mentioned. You don't need to live with a disability in order to understand the role that challenges will play in all of our lives. It's kind of a fundamental part of the human experience. And the better equipped we are to manage those instances, the better off we all are, right? Because they can be really transformative. But how we develop the skills necessary to live with them rather than try to either deny them or run away from them, I think is really important.
yeah, absolutely. So changing gears just slightly now, we do a lot of interviews with researchers and doctors in the field of spinal cord injury.
Sure.
And really kind of where things are going. And I'm interested in your thoughts and take on the current state of spinal cord injury research and how you see it, going forward, and, just your general take on the current state of the SCI research community.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So for as long as I can remember, I've been an ardent advocate for and supporter of all forms of biomedical and regenerative medicine. That is kind of how I cut my teeth in any kind of public conversation.
Right.
It was being an advocate for stem cell research. 20 years ago, when I was a graduate student at the Harvard Kennedy School, that was the first policy issue that I felt like I had the capacity and experience to be a part of. Up until that point, that was like not a part of who I was at all. So I remember being in one of the courses that I had taken at the Harvard Kennedy School, really like the most seminal course I took in any capacity at any point in my life. It was a course on leadership, and it was a really kind of experiential course where people were encouraged to talk about issues that were of concern to them and they cared about, even knowing that they were potentially not unanimously thought of as something we should be involved in. Right. So whether that was conversations on racism or conversations on gender equity or any number of issues, and I just out of nowhere, and this is a time in my life when I still wasn't really fully aware of my own voice in different conversations, a little bit introverted, a little bit backwards, and just there was one day in class where I just started to talk about the issue of stem cell research and biomedical research, and you just kind of allowed myself to be vulnerable in ways that I never had before. And at that point, I said, wait, this is something that I really need to be much more vocal about and play a larger role in. I feel like I have something important to say, some lived experiences that I think many people don't have the opportunity really to be a part of, or a vantage point from which to see the world that many people don't ever experience. And this is a voice, this is a position that needs to be heard.
Yeah.
So for years and years and years, I became a steadfast advocate for biomedical research, and even though I wasn't doing the research myself, wanted to create as smooth a path as I possibly could for scientists for them to do the work that they need to do in order to advance cures and treatments to diseases and conditions that have long gone without any treatment. So to this day, I remain a very ardent supporter of that, and however I can make that a possibility and a reality, I am very eager to do that.
So what can you give me a couple of examples of the types of things that you've worked on or done to try and bridge that gap and give them a quicker and easier route?
Sure. So when I ran for a public office, New York State Senate, when I was just 27 years old, actually. So,
awesome.
Right out of graduate school, like right after taking this class on leadership. Like this was not something I ever would have imagined myself doing, ever. But I wanted to be so much a part of this conversation that I decided to take on an incumbent, like a 20-year incumbent here on Long Island.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So definitely a gutsy one. With stem cell research and the need for New York State to fund stem cell research as the main plank in my platform, right? So this was at a time when the federal government was quite restrictive in the kinds of funds it would allow for biomedical research, and different states were taking on the work, right, funding stem cell science and regenerative medicine within their own state borders. And I thought, New York is such a central hub of innovation and science. Why isn't New York doing this? And so that became the central platform of my campaign. So I took it right up to the top, right? Like right up to, the circles that I think many people would be reluctant to step into. So I did that just at 27 years old. And so that was kind of step number one. The outcome of the election did not go in my electoral favor. So I know, so frustrating. But the work that I did thereafter was pretty cool. So based largely on the work that I was doing, the then incoming gubernatorial candidate, so Elliot Spitzer, he initiated a $600 million stem cell research initiative here in New York, and I sat on the ethics committee of that. Yeah, so
even though you didn't win, your kind of your target was still kind of acquired in a way, shape, or form.
Exactly right. So I felt very, very proud of that. And I sat on the ethics committee of this board. So I helped to create the framework within which funding would be allowed in New York State for this research to move forward. After that, I founded a nonprofit organization called the Brooke Ellison Project, where the mission of the organization was to help provide education to people, kind of a lay audience who are not necessarily familiar with what the science was all about. And remember, this was at a time when there was tremendous misunderstanding as to what the science entailed, and what it did and what it didn't do, where the potential lied and didn't. So I created a documentary about that and showed it to audiences really all across the country, and spoke in conjunction with it. And ever since then, I've been an active writer on the topic, and addressing it from all sorts of sociological standpoints. That's what I did my PhD in, was in the social factors that affected stem cell policy in countries around the world. The first class that I taught as a professor was a course of my own creation called Stem Cells and Society. So it took a sociological perspective on stem cell science and, what factors go into a policy creation, what are the social implications for the research. So these are all different ways that I have sought to intervene and to move the science forward in whatever way that I can. And I do this knowing that the path of science is slow, right? It is slower than anyone would like it to be. It takes, twists and turns and unexpected, course corrections that take time. So at the same time, in addition to the advocacy work that I do in the regenerative medicine kind of curative side of things, I advocate for policies and policy change and technological change so that people who live with spinal cord injury can live as rich and full lives as they possibly can.
That's awesome. I think it's great to hear that you've been able to find an avenue that not only can you pour yourself into, but it's being beneficial in more unique ways. I mean, it's kind of like if people aren't searching for it, we have to put it together and get it in front of them.
Right,
and
exactly.
Sometimes that's all it takes is to get it in front of them. I mean, if I'm sitting at dinner and the waitress comes up and says, would you like a dessert? I think I'm good with dessert. But if she brings out that tray, you already know I'm going to get 2 pieces of pie because it looks so dang good on that tray.
Exactly.
So,
you didn't imagine it before. You couldn't imagine how great it looked.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's critical in what you're doing is you're bringing it and putting it in front of people so that they recognize how important and how pivotal it really could be and is becoming
Thank you.
As we move into the future. So last topic, because we're kind of getting close to our time here, but I wanted to touch on your new book that you recently had published. And I wanted to kind of have you do a little talking about, what is the book about, and who do you think should make sure that they pick up a copy? Other than everyone, of course.
Everyone's short answer to that question is everybody. Thank you. So after I graduated from college back in 2000, my mother and I and my entire family really we wrote a book called Miracles Happen that documented, kind of chronicled our lives from the time of my accident 10 years later till I graduated from college. And actually, that book was made into the movie The Brooke Ellison Story, directed by Christopher Reeve way back in 2004. It's actually his last project. Yeah,
very cool.
Kind of a very close attachment to him, to the Reeve family. And as a result of that,
does that make you Superwoman?
I wouldn't reject the title. That's for sure. But thank you. I don't know if exactly on par, but I certainly it's something I would take with great pride. So thank you.
Absolutely.
But ever since then, I knew I wanted to write another book, and I was kind of delaying. I didn't really know how I wanted to approach it or what. I kind of was delaying, kind of dilly-dallying for a while. Right after my 40th birthday, literally days after my 40th birthday, I was diagnosed with a stage 4 pressure ulcer on my pressure wound on the back of my left leg that was infected with all sorts of really awful things.
That's scary.
It was terrifying, and very much put my survival in question. Once it was ultimately treated and kind of gotten a handle on, I said, okay, there's no more time to waste. You need to get your thoughts down and you'd write this book. So I squirreled myself away in my bedroom for that entire summer. And I would not let myself deviate from what I wanted. This is kind of hope in action, right? So knowing that I had this challenge in my life but setting a goal for myself and finding the way to do it. And in this book, which I called Look Both Ways, so kind of almost like a tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to the nature of my accident, but also really important lessons that I have learned over the past 32 years living with quadriplegia. Really, really deep and personal life lessons about living with disability, what that means, how I have, what it means to be the disabled person in a family, how I needed to incorporate technology into my life, how I experienced instances of marginalization or infantilization or invisibility, which is something I think many people with disabilities experience. And then I use the 5th chapter, which is kind of the middle chapter of the book, to turn the perspective around, right? So I talk about all these instances of sadness or trauma, and then I turn it around and look in the other direction, right? What have I learned? What really strengths and virtues have I gleaned by virtue of living with a disability? So I talk about hope. I talk about love and my understandings of relationships. I talk about leadership, which is what I understand to be kind of a maximization of hope, right? Hope kind of being an individual construct, with leadership being kind of those very same tenets and those very same skills, but applied to a larger kind of societal audience. And then what my position now as a professor means, and how I look at questions of medical ethics and science ethics, and how that intersects with disability, and the deep and personal understandings that I have come to that I think are applicable to anybody's life, whether or not you live with disability, because we all experience challenge. And I put everything that I had, everything that I could, I pulled on every emotional lever in my body and poured my heart, tears streaming down my face, wrote with as much honesty and sincerity as I possibly could. And this is probably what I feel most proud about, proudest that I possibly could about anything that I've done. So I want to share it with as many people as possible.
That pitch right there has me ready to go buy the book tonight. So
I hope so.
I'm excited to give it a read. And once again, we wanted to thank you for joining us on the podcast. I think anybody who goes and reads this book, I think what they're going to find is that not only are you brilliant, but you're thinking about all of these scenarios and situations on a level that's greater than yourself. Even though you're probably using a personal touch and approach to it all. It applies to so much more than just people with disabilities. And I think
thank you.
It's people like you that are going to take, the SCI community to that next level, and really start bringing about change. So
I appreciate that so much, David. Thank you. And certainly you as well. And Peter and everybody who works with the Peter Morton Foundation and these kinds of platforms are getting the conversation as broadly broadcast and as widely accepted as possible. Like, this is how this happens. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining us, Brooke, or Dr. Ellison, as I should refer to you. But it was absolutely wonderful to have you on here. We'll have links to everything we talked about in the description below. If you're watching us on YouTube, please think about giving us a subscribe and even a like. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, you could always give us a follow. And of course, if you want to learn more about Dr. Ellison or any of the work she's done or is doing, links are in the description. So thank you again, Brooke, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.